So Lorraine, welcome to another Conveyancing Matters Q&A. We're going to be talking about searches. Today we're sponsored by Search Bureau. So do conveyancers think about what searches are needed when transacting on properties? What do you think?
Well, I've got to say, Stu, I deal with lots of firms and I think the answer is probably no in a lot of cases. And what we're talking about here is when you're acting on a purchase and you need to do your pre-contract searches, of course, the question is, do most conveyancers now turn their minds to exactly what searches might be needed on that purchase, rather than just going to their search provider and inputting the address and pressing send, ticking 3 boxes and pressing send? And certainly my experience, Stu, obviously I teach a lot of firms and what have you, far more conveyancers now, far more people working in conveyancing are just not actually thinking, what searches do we need? So, Stu, let's start at the beginning. What searches would you, pre-contract searches, would you consider to effectively be standard on every purchase?
Well, I suppose the norm these days are your local drainage and environmental. And most of the search providers, so we use Search Bureau, and they will have, a PCS pack, if you want to call it that. So the guys in the office can simply go onto their platform, order that pack, purely made for convenience. But of course, they have numerous other searches that the guys here can use if they want to. And we said earlier, didn't we, about the file plan and evaluating what might be needed. So maybe let's go through some of the other searches that, of course, might be applicable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's still quite interesting because for years, I think conveyancers, we've all treated, for example, the environmental search as a pretty standard search. But it is quite interesting because a lot of the textbooks, and certainly the conveyancing handbook, still sort of treat the environmental search as a location-specific search, which I don't think anybody does these days. So, I mean, we've got to look at the title plan and we've got to look at the locality to decide at the get-go if non-standard searches might be required. For example, is the property, does it back onto a railway? And again, to be fair, the Law Society's Conveyancing Handbook has got an excellent chapter, by the way, on pre-contract searches, but all of these strange, quirky ones. So I've got no financial or other involvement with that book, sadly, but I would say if anybody wants to get it, they should. Well, their firm should get it because it does have an excellent chapter on this. So, for example, if a property backs onto a railway, maintenance of the sidings and so on and so forth, good old Japanese knotweed is relevant. But the point is, Stu, you're not going to generally know about that unless you look at the plan before you submit the searches.
Yes, of course.
So what other examples would you have?
Well, I suppose my favourite one or the most popular.
That's really sad. You know how sad that is, Stu?
Very
to
sad.
Have a favourite search, mate.
Maybe. But the most popular one, I would say, especially if we're talking sort of geographical wise, would probably be the mining search.
Yeah.
I know there's different types of mining searches as well, but if we talk mainly, the coal mining search, in the old days, that would almost be considered as, almost one of the normal ones.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, that is totally location specific. I used to work in East Anglia, in rural East Anglia. I think in my professional career, I only ever did about 3 mining searches because I happened to be acting for clients buying in mining areas. But of course, we don't need them in East Anglia because there was no mining.
Yeah, of course.
It's a very, very location specific. But I think what conveyancers need to be really careful about is the sort of additional sort of pop-up options that the search providers offer. Sort of, do you want these additional searches? Tick the box if you do. Clearly something like HS2, if a property falls within the area of the HS2 may or may not, let's face it, run through. That can be really helpful. But I do think, Stu, conveyancers need to be really careful, don't they, about just ticking that box for those extra searches without thinking about the cost and without actually taking the client's instructions as to whether they want them.
Yeah, absolutely. And always taking clients' instructions.
Yeah.
You always need to advise clients as to why you think something should be done. And of course, getting their authority to pay for it.
Yeah, well, and also, of course, and something I do think conveyancers these days perhaps forget or don't know, is that if a conveyancing firm does an additional search, a non-standard search, well, by definition, the firm is then taking on the obligation to advise on it.
Of course.
So it isn't just a case of ticking a box and hoping for the best. If, you are then taking that obligation on to advise, frankly, whether your client wanted it or not.
Yeah.
Now, another search, sort of search, I suppose, that we used to do quite a lot was, and different search providers call them different things, but a plan search.
Yeah.
Because, of course, again, lots of people don't realise that the local authority search only tells you about that property.
Absolutely.
So despite the name,
Yeah.
local search, it doesn't tell you about planning applications in the locality.
Yeah.
So, and I know, variations of Enviro searches also have details of planning applications in the locality. But I always found that, lots of clients were really interested in that. They would want to know, be actively interested.
Yeah. That would probably be the most common search a client requests us to institute, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the key for me on all of this, Stu, is the conveyancer turning their mind to what searches do we need for this particular property right at the beginning of the transaction. So, Stu, something that's becoming more popular, and I kind of understand why, I don't agree with it in many ways, but is sort of a searches pack being obtained before you're even instructed. So what view do you take on that?
Well, it's a difficult one, because lots of sort of panel providers that introduce bulk work, they will introduce the search pack. You get given that as a lawyer. My attitude on that is that I can see in some circumstances the advantage to those, because you're getting the results on those searches as soon as possible. So again, you can advise your client as soon as possible. It gives them the opportunity to potentially withdraw perhaps before they've paid for a survey, something like that, maybe potentially saving costs. But the key point to receiving a search pack in advance is that it doesn't end there. Once you've seen the results of those searches, that may then mean, you need to consider another additional search, or again, when you receive the draft contract pack containing all the information from the vendor, you then may wish to institute more searches. So there's a balance to this, isn't there?
Yeah.
I do think, again, though, we're a bit blasé, and I think sometimes some of the panel providers are a bit blasé to the fact that it should be the client's decision. You're spending clients' money at the end of the day as to when they should be put in hand. I think, there are certain circumstances where there are delays at councils.
Yeah.
I can see mileage then in ordering, searches before you're in receipt of all information. Potentially modern auctions if you haven't got a search within a pack, stuff like that, where you're up against a deadline maybe. I just think in general, sometimes we're lacking in terms of individually looking at the transaction and what might be needed and making a decision from there.
Yeah, it's that critical thinking, isn't it? I think that's what's been filtered out, really.
Yeah.
As I say, I'm not a fan of buyers being persuaded to buy a search pack really early on, not least, as we've said, because it might not contain everything that the conveyancer subsequently thinks is necessary. The buyer then may be told some months down the line, oh, well, actually, we need to do all these again, which can be very, very unsatisfactory.
Well, that's a really important point to make. And that is that the earlier you do these searches, the more chance there is that they could actually expire.
Yeah, absolutely.
A point lost on many, many people, I would say,
It completely is. And of course, the point about it is everybody likes to have a go at the conveyancer, but we're the one carrying the can. We're the people that are properly insured. We're the people that are going to get the kicking if something goes wrong. Yeah. Now, a local search, for example, doesn't have a lifespan, but conveyancers shouldn't really be relying on local searches that are anything more than about 3 months old.
Yeah.
And transactions, as we know, are taking so much longer these days.
It's that obvious thing, though, isn't it? Something could change.
Yeah.
And don't forget your lending obligations as well.
Completely. And again, something buried in the lender's handbook, no searches apart from priority searches should be more than 6 months old at the date of completion. So I guess maybe my concluding question is, on every new build, do conveyancers review their files before they draw down their loan to make sure that's the case? Doubt it. So maybe to conclude, I think conveyancers should be thinking more critically about what searches they are applying for. I think if you're using a good search provider, you use Search Bureau, you can work very, very closely with your searches provider. They can get to know what you want. They can provide you with extra value if they know you're going to want the planning permissions, or if, as you've said, there's a local authority that's got loads of delays. I mean, a good search provider can be a massive help.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
a conveyance.
Well, a good search provider will notify you the potential that there are other searches available for that geographical area.
Yeah.
So they do have, they can be a massive help.
Yeah, absolutely. But should conveyancers just be inputting the address and pressing send? No.
Yeah, I think one of the big problems, especially with panel type work, are that maybe a client will get asked before they've instructed a lawyer, of course, do you want these searches? You've got to pay this amount of money. And maybe there's a lack of a distinction between searches and surveys. I think the client may just think that this is the process. I've got to pay for these. If they were to go onto Google, it would tell them that they need them. So maybe they probably don't understand that they've got the option to wait. And I think that's where the problem comes in.
Yeah, and I think people that offer search packs might say, oh, well, yes, but it's the waiting that's the problem. Well, I disagree. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah,
because really, if a buyer instructs their conveyancer early on in the process, that can be massively helpful.
Well, I was just going to go on to that point, funny enough. We've obviously spoken many times about upfront information, material information, having searches done when maybe properties are placed on the market by sellers, the old day HIPs, etc. But of course, they're going to expire, aren't they? So what do you think about searches being done that far in advance? That's another level, isn't it?
Yeah, they're just not helpful.
No.
They're just not current. They don't have current information. And therefore, I think people are going to end up paying twice. And the problem is that by then it's the conveyancer that's going to get it in the neck, as ever, for doing their job.
Definitely.
But I absolutely think the concluding point is conveyancers should be thinking and must be thinking, what searches do we need on this particular property, and shouldn't just be relying on a pack or a tick box in there from their search provider.
I think it's even more important. We probably diluted the point a bit. You could be found to be negligent if you've not advised the client about the fact that there are additional searches, giving them the option.
But that, of course, in your professional opinion, should be done. That's what the client's paying for.
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
paying for your professional opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully some of our conveyancing colleagues will think a bit more closely about what searches do I need on this particular property.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Stu.
Take care.